943 KTRS Radio. Gabe Crocker, our guest, president of the St. Louis County Police Association. I just let you know that our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, is going bonkers. You will be able to hear this entire show in its entirety. It'll be posted up on KTRS.com. You can watch it at stltoday.com/McGraw, but we're going to post it and we're going to put it out. So follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and it'll be out there up on KTRS.com. Gabe, Friday night I was watching the rioting and the looting. Friday night, Saturday morning, and I called 911. And I've told this story before on the air, and I called my sister, and I told my sister the story. People outside of St. Louis do not believe what I'm about to tell you. I called 911, and I said, I'm watching. There's looting going on in Ferguson. Will you please send a police officer? And the 911 operator said, we have been told and instructed by the Highway Patrol we are not allowed to respond. Is that true?
That's my understanding. Again,
I know it's true because it happened. But
it happened to you, so you know.
Explain to me what was going on. How is that possible?
Again, these are directives that
All
came.
Right, stop. We got to go to the news conference.
Okay,
hold that thought.
Sure,
we'll get to you. Here's the news conference, the Michael Brown news conference from the Greater St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church.
I don't think, is there a mic here? Is there a mic here with a... You can't hear? Okay. Just hold on a minute. Lindsay, where's my... turn it on, son.
All right, they have not started. They're just little preliminary things. Let's go back to Gabe here for a second. Gabe, so what? Explain, because I wasn't the only one calling 911 who got that response. What happened?
Well, I have to assume to some degree, McGraw, that because you were calling 911, you were calling a centralized location. Most likely you were calling Clayton or West County, where our 911 dispatch centers are.
Right.
And so you weren't able to reach the command center directly. I will tell you that we do have officers that are responding to certain incidents.
Okay. Hold on a second. Are they back now? Is the doctor on the stand? Okay, hold that thought, Gabe.
No problem.
Let's go back to the news conference.
To the business at hand, we're going to introduce now Attorney Crump.
Thank you so much, Pastor Pearson, for allowing us to have this press conference, this important press conference here in your church. I'm Attorney Benjamin Crump. I have the honor of serving as the lead counsel along with co-counsels Anthony Gray and Darrell Parks on behalf of the family of Michael Brown Jr. We also have present with us one of the highly respected, one of the most renowned forensic pathologists living today, Dr. Michael Biden, who we retain to be the family's pathologist to conduct an independent autopsy on their behalf. With him, who assisted him, is Professor Sean Parcells. They will be addressing you momentarily. The Brown family wanted to have this autopsy performed on their behalf because they did not know whether the federal officials were going to conduct their own independent autopsy. And they did not want to be left having to rely on the autopsy done by the St. Louis law enforcement agencies, the same individuals they feel are responsible for executing their son in broad daylight. So therefore, that is why they begged and pleaded to have an independent autopsy done. The attorneys here, we know too well, if you don't have your own autopsy and you have to depend completely on the police department autopsy, that's not a good thing. But even our clients understood that wasn't a good thing, that they could not trust what was going to be put in the reports about the tragic execution of their child. Secondly, I want to stress very clearly that this is only a preliminary report, very preliminary. It answered questions, and Dr. Biden and Professor Parcells will get to elaborate, but it answered just basic questions. The number of shots, which was always a question that not only the family, the citizens of Ferguson, but people all over the country who had this colorblind curiosity to know what happened wanted to know. And that question was answered partly, and as Dr. Biden has opined and stated in the interview that was released, that it could have been answered on day one if you were really trying to have transparency be the objective. But what we now know from Dr. Biden and Professor Parcells' very preliminary autopsy is at least six shots. Could be more, but at least six. They will have to consort with the other medical examiners who did the first autopsy. And Dr. Biden will explain to you why that's so very, very important, doing thousands and thousands of autopsies, as he explains. You want all the information you can get. This only tells part of the story. Also the clothes have to be recovered that will talk about whether there's any residue on them and so forth. He explains as only he can explain. You want to talk about what was recovered in the x-rays, and most importantly, the witness accounts, the eyewitness accounts, which is so very important into bringing the full story together. And what does this preliminary autopsy tell us? It verifies that the witness accounts were true, that he was shot multiple times, and it's going to be one of those things that we have to get all the witness statements out and look at all the autopsies, all the evidence to put this picture together. But his family knows that the witnesses, what they were telling them about him being shot multiple times in broad daylight, was accurate. And you all have reported on many of the witness accounts when they said his hands was up. That is in there. When they talk about the ways it happened, it's in there. And so we have to go from this point with this preliminary autopsy and try to get all the information so we can get the answers that not only the family wants, but Ferguson wants and the country wants. His mother and father and their family, they had just a few questions for Dr. Biden, and that is, the first question was, how many times was he shot? And so that question was answered, at least initially. As Dr. Biden met with the mother, she had the lingering question, as any mother would have, was my child in pain? And Dr. Biden shared with her, in his opinion, he did not suffer. And then lastly, his mother wanted to ask the question that Dr. Biden nor any of the lawyers could answer. What else do we need to give them to arrest the killer of my child? At this time, we will have Attorney Darrell Parks address you, and then Attorney Gray will address you, and then we will have Dr. Biden and Professor Parcells come and try to give all of us a little lesson on pathology. Thank you, Attorney Parks.
Thank you. in a situation like this, facts become very important, evidence becomes very important, and it's so important that the facts in this case really get out. This case has suffered from a lack of transparency of the, I'm actually going to get ready, I'm going to hold it up and show them something. And you heard Attorney Crump say there was multiple shots. There are two shots that I want to focus on for my purpose right here today because they become important because they show that the direction of the bullet was in a back to front direction. The first one is what we call the kill shot, and the one that when Attorney Crump was speaking that he wouldn't have suffered from is right here. At the apex of his head, there was a very, very severe and clear injury. At the apex, the very top, that went from a back to front position. Also, there's a second shot to the head that you've heard us speak about. That shot is here. There's a little dot on the diagram that you see right by his hairline. That bullet went in there and came out near the eye area. That's very important because it shows a back to front for both of those. And it supports what the witnesses said about him trying to surrender to the officer. And his head was in a downward position. It had to be for what had happened. Those type of facts are clear. And we believe that given those kind of facts, this officer should have been arrested. Those things speak for themselves. Why would he be shot in the very top of his head? 6'4" man. Makes no sense. And so that's what we have. And that's why we believe that those two things alone are ample evidence for this officer to be arrested.
Good morning, everyone. I want to continue the call and the plea for those that are reporting, for those that are investigating this case, to remain fair, to remain balanced, and to look at this case for what it is. I can see that there is a very disturbing divide that's developing in our community, and this is not what we initially came to the community and called for. Our call was for fairness. It was for transparency. We had to have this autopsy so we can have information at our fingertips that we can then explain to those that have called me on multiple occasions, and I have not been able to say a word, and I have not spoken to anybody about what I knew personally. So this is this opportunity to get this information out. One thing that I will address from a factual standpoint, I saw a news report this morning, and one of the, I'm not sure if he was an officer or not, but one person reported that the events last night may have been spurred by or triggered by the release of this autopsy. Let me just tell you for a fact that this autopsy came out 2 hours later after the law enforcement authorities made a decision to converge on that crowd. And so if they want to make a connection between the release of this information and what happened last night, that connection is misplaced. Thank you so much.
And now we will call Dr. Michael Biden and Professor Sean Parcells to discuss about their preliminary autopsy findings.
Right. Sorry. Thank you, Ben. We're here as forensic scientists. We're looking for information that is from the autopsy and other scientific studies that will allow us to eventually reach final conclusions. But the question that is asked to me most commonly in these types of situations, when somebody dies after an encounter with police, anywhere in this country, everywhere in other countries too, when it's predictable that there may be community concerns and that the parents of the decedent doesn't trust the government because the government that's caused the death, and they request a second autopsy, independent autopsy, and this is not uncommon. A third is very uncommon. That's going to happen today or tomorrow from the federal government, I understand. So that, and the reason for it is, as Mr. Crump has indicated, is that when there isn't transparency. I was medical examiner and chief medical examiner in New York City for some 25 years as I worked there. We had a number of these encounters. And what we found in New York City was that the sooner the information goes out, the sooner the family is talked to. The family has a right to know how their loved one died. This calms community and family concerns over cover-up or not getting told the truth. And
this is live coverage of the Michael Brown Family News Conference, 10 o'clock, KTRS St. Louis.
Sudden deaths and gunshot wounds and stab wounds, that the next day the autopsy results come out and then answers these kind of questions. How many bullet wounds, and most important, did my loved one suffer? Pain and suffering is concerned. And we can answer those questions on day one on the basis of the injuries, such as when there's a damage to the brain, bullet wound to the brain, that causes immediate loss of consciousness at that point. And telling that to a family can often be very helpful at a trying time for the family. So that's why we were called. I must say, when we were called, Mr. Crumpet said they've been trying to get the FBI, the federal government involved without success at that time, and that's why they wanted me to come in. And shortly after we started the autopsy, whoops, Channel 5, I'm sorry. After we started the autopsy, then it was announced that they were going to do another autopsy, which is fine, because it shows the interest and the concern the federal government has in this kind of death. And you're all here because many black men die of accident, of homicide, every day in this country. And rarely, and never, as far as I recall, has the President of the United States got involved. The only other time the President got involved, I remember, was when Charles Manson did his thing, and you guys weren't born in those times, and he was very upset by it. But not in a civil rights way. So I think that, understanding what's happening, and one thing I want to add here, though, Mary Case is the chief medical examiner in St. Louis County, and she's a very excellent forensic pathologist, and I'm sure her work will turn out to be very, very excellent when it's released. But again, it hasn't been released yet, and the family wants to know certain simple questions that so far we've been able to answer. Sean Parcells has been instrumental in the autopsy evaluation. I don't know if you want to point out anything on the anatomy of the gunshot wounds, that beautiful drawing.
First of all, I'm Professor Sean Parcells, and I would like to thank everyone for bringing me into this case, and we're here for the family to answer questions about what happened to Michael Brown. And I want you guys to understand that when an autopsy is done, that we look at the body in an anatomical position. This is the anatomical position. This is not how we stand, how we walk, but medically speaking, we like to describe wounds this way. And as you all know, Dr. Bodden and I concluded that he was shot at least 6 times. We've got one to the very top of the head, the apex. We've got one that entered just above the right eyebrow. We've got one that entered the top part of the right arm. We've got a graze wound, a superficial graze wound to the middle part of the right arm. We've got a wound that entered the medial aspect of the right arm, and we've got a deep graze wound that produced a laceration to the palm of the right hand. Now these two, where the X's are, represent what Dr. Bodden and I feel are possible re-entry wounds. So the wound that hit the forehead right above the right eyebrow actually came out right around the right eye and went back in, and then it exited again right here in the jawline and came out and went back into the right shoulder. That's from one bullet. Now we have to confer that with the first autopsy. This wound right here to the side of the chest is also a possible re-entry wound. Now, which wound on the arm that correlates to, we're not sure. We have to correlate all of this with the first autopsy. And the other critical point that I want everyone to be very clear on is that this wound to the medial aspect of the right arm, just generally speaking, happened right about here. Okay? So what Dr. Bodden and I feel that occurred, and by the way, this red mark is showing that same wound. This is not a separate wound. This is showing the same wound in the same location in that arm, but you're looking at it from the back. And as the attorneys were saying, there was a witness statement that said that he was walking away and the gun goes off and he kind of jerks. So the question asked to us was, could that wound occurred from him walking away and then he turns around? It's consistent with that. However, understand too that while the shot could have come from the back, because if I'm standing here walking along and get shot from that direction, you see I pull my arm up, it's in that same general area. The arm is a very mobile part of your body. So it also could have occurred when he was putting his hands up. So I put my hands up and you see where that wound is at. It could have happened if he put his arms across in a defensive manner. We don't know. And we still have to look at other aspects of this investigation before we can really start piecing things together. Dr. Bodden?
Yeah, the attorneys behind me thought that there might be a question among you. We're here to seated young lady.
Are any of these wounds inconsistent with the witness accounts that Michael Brown was shot while rushing the police officers?
There could be consistent with his going forward or going backward, but they're for the front, and if he was shot going forward, he would collapse right away. The problem, yeah, so it's possible. There are a number of different possibilities to that.
Can you tell how far away they were shot?
Yeah, the question was how far away. Yes, we can tell certain distance. We can tell the distance from the muzzle of the gun to the body and the body's clothing. If there's the closer the weapon is to the body, the more powder residue there'll be on the body and the skin and the clothing. In this instance, there's no gunshot residues on the skin surface, so that the muzzle of the gun was at least 1 or 2 feet away, the muzzle at the time of discharge. It could have been 30 feet away, it would be the same thing. But in order to be firm about that, we also have to look at the clothing, which we haven't had the opportunity to look at because sometimes the clothing can filter out gunshot residues.
Doctor, can you say how many times he was actually shot, which you were talking about?
Yeah. There's 6 bullets struck him. 6 bullets struck, and 2 may have re-entered, and 3 bullets were recovered at the first autopsy, according to our report. There were the 2 head wounds and the bullet in the chest stayed in the body and were removed at the first autopsy from our examination of the body. One of the things that's going to be important for us to see is the x-rays, the old black and white x-rays that will show where the bullets were before the autopsy was started. and that's documented in x-rays taken before an autopsy in a gunshot wound case.
And we know those exist. We know those x-rays exist.
Yes, I spoke with Dr. Mary Case, and they did all the proper x-rays, photographs, and they should be available at some time, whether today or whether 3 or 4 months from now. Often depends on what the prosecutor wants to do. That is, Mary Case could have told you everything I'm telling you on day one, but often in an investigation like this, it's not uncommon for prosecutors not to want information released. But I think in my experience, when that happens, it only gets the community more upset. Well,
No, ma'am. Only, are you a member of the media?
I am not.
Okay. Only the media. Only the media.
I didn't hear. Right. Two things. Access to the clothing. I think at some point we should, the defense should have access to the clothing. That depends largely. The clothing is now, from Dr. Case's advice, in the Los Angeles, St. Louis County Police Agency. Normally, they're going to be looking at it. It's up to them when the defense, not defense, the families will have access to it. So at some time, there will be access to it and the results. As far as the other part of the question was, were there any signs of a struggle? There weren't signs of a struggle. In talking about a struggle, one of the things that the attorneys have also asked for is the medical examination of the officer who was in a struggle. So signs of injury to the officer, to Michael Brown, are both needed. One thing is that there are abrasions around the right side of Mr. Brown's face, rubbing against the ground, which happened, as best we can tell, when after the gunshot wounds he fell flat down unprotected and got those abrasions. Otherwise, no evidence of a struggle, and it will be important in evaluation of the case for the medical examiner, the FBI, for the defense, the family, to see what happened to the officer. Yeah, look, you got over here for a second.
Where the autopsy took place and how long it took?
Our autopsy that we did, the first autopsy at the county medical examiner. Second one was at the Arthur Lane Funeral Home, where the body was delivered for burial, and we did that in the office. And it was about 3-4 hour autopsy, a re-autopsy.
How do your findings resemble or differ from the county autopsy results?
Well, we can't answer that till we see the county. My impression, having done this some 50 years or so, is that they're going to be very similar.
When do you expect to have those in hand?
I think they're available now. The autopsy records are available now. When it's going to be released is probably up to the prosecutor.
Correct. A few more.
Right here. Excuse me.
Hang on.
Right here.
Right here.
Get that again. You said, could it be consistent with the way police said it happened and the way witnesses said it happened? Talk a little bit more about how this autopsy was.
Well, the autopsy itself is consistent with police or witnesses. There are many different witness testimonies. Many of them seem to line up in one direction, some in another direction. Right now, till we get more information, till we get, from a forensic science point of view, can't distinguish, can't make a definite judgment. Now, the lawyers who've interviewed witnesses, we haven't interviewed, we don't interview witnesses, may be impressed with some witnesses who seem more trustworthy than others, and as the police are doing too. This is what juries are supposed to do. Juries are supposed to look at witnesses and tell who's telling the truth and who isn't. Well, lawyers do that all the time. And so they have more information than we have. But right now, from the science point of view, we can't determine which witness, and there are all different kinds of observations made, is most consistent with all of the forensic findings.
Gentleman in the green,
Doctor, you mentioned transparency, you mentioned scientific information, and you mentioned standards. Was there any investigative reason, any scientific reason why this information could not have been released after day one? Is there any?
Well, no. This is a judgment based on, and this is one of the things that the family was concerned about. Even though we know when an autopsy is done, when any autopsy is done that you guys go to, 95% of the information is available right away. Stab wounds, gunshot wounds, things like microscopic slides and toxicology, which may be of value but don't determine the cause of death. Whether or not a decedent has cocaine on board might be of value to see why an incident happened, but it has nothing to do with the cause of death. So I think that my impression is that like in most medical examiner's offices, when an autopsy is completed, the medical examiner can release it immediately, or most of it, pending the prosecutor's wishes. Because if the prosecutor says that that's going to interfere with our investigation, then medical examiners hold up, and the families may not know for weeks and months the kind of questions we're talking about.
Two more, Dave. Two more. Go ahead, Dave.
Can we speculate on what order the wounds occurred?
I don't think we cannot speculate exact order of gunshot wounds. Forensically, that's impossible. However, Dr. Bodden, I do feel because of the 2 gunshot wounds to the head, indicating that Mr. Brown was bending over as they were coming down, that those 2 shots were most likely the last 2 to occur to him.
That's about as far as we can go.
What about toxicology?
Toxicology results have to be done by the medical examiner at the first autopsy. They get the blood and everything out. Second autopsy, no more blood, and there's been embalming fluids, etc. So we have to wait for the medical examiner, and it depends how quickly they're rushed. The toxicology should be able to be done in a week or 2, but oftentimes it gets on the end of the line of all the other cases that they're dealing with and may take months. But that should be available, especially with your concern and the President's concern. It should be available very soon.
Well, we got a feeling that toxicology report, like other things, will be released to you sooner than later. There was one question from a non-press person. We wanted to ask it, and then we were going to. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My question is the 4 shots that were that entered his body first. I'm assuming that he could have survived. Am I correct?
Yes, he could have survived all the shit. That's good. I should have mentioned something. All of these gunshot wounds were survivable, except for the one in the top of the head that went through the brain.
But that being said, and all of us here know what happened to Michael, why hasn't the officer Wilson been arrested?
You want to try to address that?
Well, who gets arrested, as you know, is a political district attorney decision, and it's not a forensic science decision, for good or for bad.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
In terms of the process, the congressman said he was not confident that the prosecutor locally would file charges. Does that have to move forward before the federal government takes action?
The family would rather, as they've stated all along, that this whole process be done independently of local law enforcement authorities, because they are concerned that the kill of their child won't be held accountable and they won't get equal justice. Thank you.
No. Yeah, that's correct. That position, because the gun can also be moved in many directions, so we can only tell that the direction it's going in, but that direction could be up or kneeling or down, and that depends on other factors which the lawyers know more than we know. Yes.
You want to point out what the last shot?
Yeah. This is the last